I had him download the wrong thing first, and we had to uninstall it in order to get the other install to work. So I know better than to do that now. All right. So in the virtual machine, I'm going to start the magnifier so I can make things bigger. All right, so we want to go. I'm going to do this real quickly. You just want to search for MySQL download. The mistake I made this morning was to have them download the Workbench separately, but the Workbench is included in the MySQL. So we want to go to the MySQL downloads, MySQL community downloads. If you need the actual address, it's dev.mysql.com. How many of you, if any of you have used MySQL before? A couple of you have, 3? Yeah. It underpins a lot of the web. Partially because it was cheap and cheap 2.3. Partially because it was fast and easy. Some of the things that make it fast and easy are things that I don't like about it, because it doesn't implement relational rules very strictly, and it also doesn't have very good security.
Can this be installed on anything, or do we have to use it?
This can be installed on anything except the underlying machine here, because you have no permissions to install anything, right? But
so the other one could too as well, but just because we don't have permissions.
Right. Well, the other one, so SQL Server generally only runs on Windows. Okay. There are some ways that you can make it run on Macs and Linux, but it takes a lot of configuring and a lot of work. But MySQL runs natively on anything. You can install it on a Mac, you can install it on Linux, you can install it anywhere. In Windows too. Did you guys get to this? So Dev MySQL. Oracle owns MySQL right now. They bought it when they bought Sun. Some people really hate that, which is why there is MariaDB, which we could do also. A MariaDB, which the same people that made MySQL made that, but they made it so that it wasn't owned by Oracle. It's still free. It's always free. If you do like WordPress, MySQL is the content management part of WordPress.
So we're doing that top-down one then?
Yeah, we're doing the top-down load. And we want to go to the download page. So this is, I scrolled down on this. This is the downloads MySQL community server. We're going to go to the download page, and we'll just do the first one. As I said, what I found last period is that if you do this, you get the Workbench, you get everything. So we don't need to do any separate installs. The first one, the reason why it's a lot smaller is it's a web installer. Does that make sense? The other downloads the whole install package. So I'm just going to do download the top one. And I'm not going to log in or sign up. I'm just going to say, no thanks, just start my download. If you have an Oracle account or MySQL account, you can log in, and they'll just send you lots and lots of junk mail. Yeah. So I'm going to do run. And then with luck, it'll launch the installer. There it goes. You have to say yes, of course. And yes. Okay. Before I walk through it, I'll see if you guys all get there. this is in the virtual machine. And this one for the MySQL. This is what we're going to use next. I just wanted to get you to have a flavor of the SQL is the same, the relational design principles are the same, but the software feels a little different.
So just a refresh number.
Yeah.
What did we use last week?
We use SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server.
And this is my SQL.
This is MySQL, which is owned by Oracle. It's not Oracle. Oracle is a separate product.
They couldn't have just made it easier. That all sound the same.
Well, they all use SQL as a language, so SQL is in a lot of the names of them, but they are different products. Different product that does the same thing, creates a relational database. If you are here, actually most of you are a little bit beyond that, you do want to accept the license. I suppose you could read it if you want. But if you don't accept the license, it will not let you continue. So we're going to do the default. If you look there, it includes the SQL Server, includes the shell, which is the command line access. It includes the router, which we really don't need. It includes the Workbench, which is what we're going to use. And it includes some other things which actually won't install, like MySQL for, I guess we could do custom just to get rid of those. Because it's most of these things after Workbench won't install. If we did custom, we could get rid of them. But you could just ignore them, which is what I've been doing. So I'm going to leave it as default and do next. So it's telling me that it doesn't have what it needs to install those. That's fine. I'm just going to do next. It says, do you really want to go? And yes. So we've got these that we want to install. And if you need, I will walk around and help you all get there too if you're behind. If you need a minute, I'm just going to execute.
Just you say which one was?
I did the default at the top, and then just do next. And ignore those. And just do next. Let me say yes. There's all sorts of tools that we're not going to get because we don't have the other parts there. Some people got all of these installed, and some people didn't. So I'm not sure. I'm going to do execute. This is going to take a minute, which will help me. These don't necessarily, some of these have failed, but they are not necessarily failed. Notice that it starts going again. It's installing that. Okay. Let's try this one again. Why is it not going? If you keep trying them again, eventually they come through. But you do want, at a minimum, you need the Workbench and the server. It'd be nice to have the samples too, but at the very minimum, you need the Workbench and the server. Yeah.
Sending me.
Yeah, that's fine. All right, so just try it again. Did it work? Or just do it slowly? So the trick is don't go on past the screen until you've got most of them as green.
Just keep clicking, try again.
Yeah, just keep clicking, try again. Yeah, I don't understand that. Like some of them worked right the first time and others don't. Yeah, Workbench for that.
Of course.
So, yeah, I mean, you can do the others if you want. You can get them all to green, but it takes a while. You want to make sure.
So just click where the it's hidden.
Well, it's still downloading settlement, so let's see what happens. I get rid of that. Yeah. I won't move on for a minute. You can if you want, but it means going into a bunch of configuration stuff. So you want to go. Mysql. That's probably good enough, although it's still downloading. That's just what's got one. But I won't let you go. Try again. Are we ready to move on, or do you guys need another minute? Did you get the workbench or anything yet? It's still- it's really moving slow.
Well, these haven't been changed since.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, mine was.
Microsoft's like,
Well,
This is ready.
databases carrying.
Yeah, they don't.
We can't have these buttons.
Yeah.
Oh.
These are literally just fucking things.
Yeah.
Yeah, running the whole thing. So, just do no things. You can start with this. You might have to install all of those.
Yeah, it's installed.
Right. Try a quick update. And then we'll probably get upgrade. Maybe just try that.
I just,
Well, you can, you can read it, but it looks like most of it's there.
I quit installation, so.
Yeah.
I don't see that clusters.
I'm not sure why it's not.
Swing to calendar. Let me see.
No, I'm not doing it. I don't understand exactly why. I was going to show you. So those are all the activities.
Andy and I would do it together. Stumble through it.
Did you get to where you guys could go forward?
Uh,
I think you're okay, because I don't really do anything.
Yeah.
There's
I
some
did,
on
I
there.
did that 2 times now.
Let's see what we can also do
They keep changing. I mean, you see the data for that? The query parts is actually a little tougher. You can switch. You only take up this for the Yeah.
This is also. Okay. See if
Moving forward.
People were still working with the pictures from the assignment. Sure.
It was already downloaded.
Just been waiting for progress bars.
Well, yeah, mine got lucky. A lot of people.
So,
It's still in VMware?
No, no.
Or
Yeah,
installed
yes.
directly?
No, no. So open up that.
Yeah.
that's what.
And then go to
Oh, we should stay here, shouldn't we?
Stay.
dev.
Yeah. So let's go next.
It's basically my install, which downloads it.
So we want to
Now,
reconfigure this.
I love GTA.
All right, so people are gonna see a black screen, I guess, on this when they do this. All right, so if you didn't have a screw up, then when these are done, you want to do next. And some of these we're going to need to configure. Particularly, we need to configure the server. So I'm going to do next. And this is where you guys are. So we want a standalone, right? We want a standalone installation. We do not want to do a cluster. Clusters are if you're setting up a really serious database installation. And again, for the community one, this can only be for testing. But we're not going to do a cluster. So I am going to do next. All right, we're going to be a development computer. We're going to allow TCP/IP connections, and that's it. So I'm going to do next.
What was the URL we're downloading again? Devs.something?
Yeah, something. MySQl.
MySQL.com. Right down there. Okay.
Appreciate it.
You can also just search for MySQL.
Yeah.
All right, so the password encryption we'll just leave the same. Here you need to put in a password. This is the root password. If you screw up, put in a password and forget it, then you're just screwed. You just have to delete everything and reinstall. There are some batch command line things you can do to maybe try to get back in. But in general, you're just screwed. So I suggest for our uses, password 1. The same password. You can also just write pass or something. It'll complain, but it'll probably let you go ahead. But make sure it's something that you do not forget. All right, and it gives me that as a medium strength. We're not going to add any users. We don't need to. So we're just going to go from root. Again, not a great idea if you're doing this for real. But we're going to let root be our user. All right, standard system account, all of this is just the same. Basically, we're not changing anything on any of these screens other than adding the password. So we need to execute these. And hopefully they'll go as nicely as this. Okay. So that it's got our configuration for the server, etc. I can do finish. Then it'll ask you to set up the router. Do not check this and basically just do finish. We don't need the router for what we're doing. What? And this is to test the server. And so you need to put the password that you just used right down here. And then you have to check it. If the connection succeeded, you can go forward. And then we need to execute this, which hopefully won't take too long. And then finish. Okay. So anyone that needs help with this, as I said, I can do in a minute. I'm going to do next, and it's going to start the SQL and the shell, and I will let that happen, and then I'll show you. This is the shell, right? It's just the command line. This is Workbench. And I'm going to show you a little bit about Workbench in just a second. If you click this local instance, it'll connect. It'll ask for the password again. You can, if you want, save the password to Vault, although you really need to make sure that you typed it right before you do that. I'm not going to. I'm just going to do OK. So this is sort of the environment. You can move that over if you want. Sequila here is a built-in. It's a sample database. Basically DVDs and actors and stuff. Some fairly funny things in there.
Why did they call it Sequila?
I don't know.
Odd choice.
This is the query window. Like if I did select asterisk from, let's just do actor. And execute that. It will give me, there's that. Where is, it didn't like it. Why did it not like it? Am I not in Sequila? Probably not. Execute. There it goes. I had to tell it to use the database. That's not the one. Guinness, Penelope, or Penelope Guinness, Nick Wahlberg, Ed Chase, whatever. They're not real actors, not real DVDs. All right, so this is the basic database thing, but I want to show you where we're going to start, which is not here. So are you guys doing okay real quick?
Yeah.
Players?
Yeah, it took a little bit, so we didn't try again.
So there's a bit of try again, so even though it's
One, oh. It should all hit, oh. Yeah, well, the top two should the main employees.
Right, but why you have the same problem? It's not giving you the next.
That download.
Either way to redo.
Can't even go back.
I
guess I can cancel the whole thing.
Go ahead and cancel.
Am I
I think you'll be
downloading it from the
fine.
right place?
Yeah, you did. I saw it. We did exactly. Yeah.
And you're in the virtual machine, right? Yeah.
Oh, where did the download go? I'm gonna have to go back.
It had a instance that was a connection I was already running. Dev, you mysql.com/name.
Yeah, but it's just.
Try.
Okay, so community server.
Yeah. Very top one.
The download?
Yeah. And then go down and just do the top one there.
Oh, you know what?
Well,
Whichever
actually,
one that I
no,
did.
no, go to the
No,
download.
down
Oh,
the
okay,
page.
gotcha.
I was
Yeah,
wrong.
the
Then
second-
do the top one.
There you go.
Gotcha.
No, thanks.
All right, now. You did no thanks, just start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So yes. So what I'm thinking will come up.
It might actually work if it did technically.
Right, so what we want to do, we've got Workbench is
All right, yeah.
there,
I didn't see this before either.
the shell is there, those are all fine. So let's just do a reconfigure and it gets you into
Oh, okay.
configure things.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's the top one.
Cool.
And then,
We don't do anything here, right?
yeah, nothing to do there. And then use the strong. Now, I type in password.
Yeah, we just do the.
I think I use the password or something.
Yeah, that's probably easier.
I'm just freaking.
Yeah, of course.
Just root, change everything. Yep. And then I didn't get anything on there. Go ahead and hit execute. Credit for checking. And then there's a couple more things.
Just mix that way or something? Or did people just kind of?
No. There was, like, when you were downloading, a lot of people were traveling. Just one time.
Gotcha.
He said the last class, he did the wrong one, so now I figured it out, so.
Well, I'm kind of glad that we've got the second class. I feel like a lot of times,
Like the first
we have
child.
issues on the first. Yeah.
Having the first kid and the second kid, you know what to do.
You have two kids?
One that I know of. It finished months ago. A couple more screens. So I think it looks the same.
Are we ready? How's things over this side?
We got that in yours.
Yeah.
Maybe ask.
Maybe. Is it installed? Or did you have to open it? Or did it just have-
At the end, it did open it, and then he showed us the landline, and then the workbench, which is the thing right now, is looks something very, very similar. Well, it says right there that, I don't know if
I think that's what he launched into, but.
try that. That should be the command line. Yeah, that's what I have here. And then,
Did you have to run anything?
no, we haven't done any of it.
Or I mean, just to get the GUI thing open?
This is the workbench.
Oh,
So,
that's a different thing, gotcha.
Yeah, fortunately our room is downstairs, so yeah. Didn't get shit on that, but.
This is cool. I've never seen that.
yeah.
I remember like the stuff.
35. So to get that to work, he said there was a thing called database, like a
Yeah, it was.
local and then type in your password.
But we are.
It's the same one.
Do you remember my password?
Every password. It'll get to this screen. And he said that the default databases. Oh. It's just
Like fine, it's fine. It's go.
I might not have it.
maybe those weren't installed. Because then you just dock. I mean, I already recognized.
Yeah, I think he's just scared of dogs, you know, or it's like a thing, they like to make sure it's not, you know, liability.
Yeah, Paul's.
It's probably this.
This is funny. Uma, I'm like,
Yeah.
Wahlberg.
Oh, what happened?
She already made her money and moved on.
I guess
This is smart.
I think she actually had kids. That's probably why.
Oh, yeah. Freaking time.
Probably this. Let's see if there's any examples.
Oh, yeah. That looks,
Cause I know.
oh, check. So type your password and check. Yeah. And then it would say, you know, successful. There you
Well, I
go.
don't know.
And then you execute them and do their thing.
Should I close this probably?
Yeah. Just reset. Shrink it.
Just like a gas just glue on it, does its thing.
But also the faucets go into it.
Yeah, I didn't actually know. That might
I
not
don't know why it's still reconfigured there, but
We'll try to reopen it. Workbench.
I just uninstall it and reinstall if you can. All right, so I wanted to show you a couple of things to get you going if you're ready. So this is a little bit less chaotic, but not a lot less chaotic than last time. So this is where you manage your databases, but I want to show you that there is if you go to File, there's a new model. The model is a designer. Okay, and it allows you, unlike the SQL Server, you can design it without making it. Does that make sense? I'm going to double click MyDB. I'm showing it to you, but you will be doing this. So I double clicked it so I can get the properties down here. And this is the database. So instead of MyDB, I'm going to name it. What we're going to be working on is Python Club. I'll show you that in just a second. So it's now Python Club. If I click up here to add the diagram, I actually double clicked it. It creates a space for the diagram. Has nice little squares inside of squares. If I click the table and then click in here, it gives me a table. So this is the table icon. Okay, if I double click it, it will open up the properties for that table. So I'm going to name it member. And then when I go down here, it gives me ID member as a first column. You don't have to do that, but it's default for a primary key field. Notice it is an integer data type. I can make it a primary key if I want. This is primary key. This is not null. This is unique. One way you can tell is that they're down here. B is binary. This is
Unsigned.
Unsigned. Thank you. This is put a 0 in instead of a null if you want, if it's a numeric field. Auto increment, which is the same as an auto number. Auto generate you don't want. I mean generate it. That's if it's like a UID. So you can mark those properties for them. And you can do, like it says, member column, but I'll just do like member name, because that's what it'd be. Notice the varchar. Unlike SQL Server, it's already Unicode. There's no differentiation between non-Unicode and non-Unicode. So you can make this as big as up to 255, but it does need a parenthesis there. And I could make that not null. And I'm going to just do an email. I'm not going to do a whole. And I'm going to make that a little bigger because just do 145. And I'll make it not null too to make it required. So you notice up here, it put those things in the table. I'll help you do this if you want. I'm going to make one more table. This is not going to be like a real table. I mean, it's real, but it's not going to. It wouldn't be part of what I would do for the design. I'm just going to call it test. I want to show you how to do a relationship. And I'll just do a test ID. I think that's the only field I'm going to do in there. All right. I'm going to close this test table thing, mostly because I want to show you there are relationship things down here.
What is the indexes mean?
Indexes?
Yeah, it's on both of those.
Right. So there is an index in there. If I open this, there's a primary key index.
Oh,
We haven't talked about indexes much. By default, primary keys are what are called a clustered index. That means that the actual physical table is organized by the primary key. There are other indexes you can do that are binary tree type indexes that will speed up searches. They're like separate objects. You have to say what columns you want them done on, and etc. But they can speed up searches a lot when it's big, a big table. None of our tables are big enough for the indexes even to be called. So I wanted to show you one thing. So there are all of these that are solid. Kind of ignore those. There's a reason for it. I can talk about it later. We want a relationship that's dashed. And unlike SQL Server, you want to click on the foreign key first and then the primary. And it will put in a foreign key. It gives it a different name. But this is the foreign key. It has a little red diamond to tell it's a foreign key. Notice it did the one side there and the...
So on the member, what are the blue little diamonds?
They're just fields and they're required.
Oh, okay. The red means foreign key?
Yeah, the red diamond is a foreign key. Blue is just a required field. The clear one is a field that's not required.
Oh.
So when it automatically makes that foreign key, is that like...
It automatically makes the foreign key. The bad thing about this is that name may not be what you want.
Exactly. So do you have to keep that name?
You could go here and you could rename in the properties. You can also, if you want, you can go to foreign key. And if I look at that, I mean, this is a non-graphical way to identify the foreign key. So you have to give the foreign key a name, which is different than this is literally the name of the foreign key. The foreign key is an object. You say what table you're referencing, and then you say what column that you're referencing, and you always do this in the foreign key table, right? So this is test. We're referencing member, and we're referencing the member or actually the member ID. That's the field that's going to be the foreign key. There's the reference field is ID member. The dots there were confusing me. And then you can decide whether there's any actions on updates or deletes. We haven't talked about that, but there's cascade and no action. I think no action is the default. Cascade means that if you delete the parent, it deletes the child. Remember how I told you can't delete the parent unless you delete the child first? Even in SQL Server, you could set an action that says cascade delete. I just think it's an incredibly dangerous thing to do. If you accidentally delete a parent, you delete all the children too. So if you accidentally deleted a customer, you would also have lost all their sales. And the other way, if you don't set that, then that means you have to go in and deliberately choose to remove the sales before you can remove the customer. So I think that's a lot safer action. The solid line ones here are what are called identifying. You don't want to do this. I'm going to show you, and then I really, as I said, almost always you should use, there, I need to capture that in order to delete that. All right, so if I use a solid one here, so just click on there. I'm going to click here and click there. Did it do? Actually, that didn't seem to have done as bad as I think it made. It usually makes this part of the primary key. It doesn't seem to have done that, which is good. It shouldn't. Except that identifying, that actually is what it means. Oh, yeah. Well, no, that's okay. That actually looks okay. Maybe they fixed that problem. You would end up with a table where all the foreign keys are part of the primary key, and that is not what you want. I'm going to look. This doesn't have, though, it doesn't have anything there. I think it may have made it part of the primary key. Let's look at the. Yeah, it did. It made the foreign key part of the primary key. You could use that if you wanted with a linking table, but I wouldn't do it here. And if I undo that, then it changes it back. That's actually what a solid line means, but I've always managed to ignore that for the most part. A solid line means that it is identifying. It means that the foreign key is also part of the primary key of the child table, whereas a dashed line just is a normal one.
You said you'd only do that for a linking table?
Only for a linking table would you want the solid lined ones. Otherwise, you'll find yourself in nightmares trying to get the tables to work. So generally, just use these.
Probably just best for us to use the dashed ones.
Yeah. So let me show the assignment, and then I'll come around and help anyone that's still having any problems. Yeah.
Do people tend to take like the default naming conventions on this, or is it like?
I usually do see the default naming conventions for the primary key. People often
Not
change
the
them
foreign
for
key?
the foreign key. It doesn't matter a whole lot, but it can be a little bit weird.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
confusing.
So I don't know why. I mean, this ID member, it basically their way, instead of member ID, they do the ID first. But you don't have to accept those defaults. You can, on any of these, you can click here, and instead of ID test, if you want, you could do test ID. You should probably do this before the relationships. And this one, again, you could change it to, well, now it's ID member if you wanted. So, and it's fine with that. So you can change the names to be whatever you want them to be. A couple of things with these. You can save these. And unlike SQL Server, there actually is a file for the models. So I'm just going to call this test. They have a MWB, and you can load them up into another Workbench. So when I save this, where's it going to go? It's going to go to Documents. There is actually a document that you can move around and share. So there are things about this that are way nicer. So there's my test thing. And you could just load it when you do File. So let's close this. So I'm just going to close this diagram. I'm going to close the model. And I'm going to do File, Open Model. And I'll go to Test, and it's there.
Nothing's been actually created.
Nothing's been actually created. So when you are done, but I would wait until you're done because it's a bit of a pain if you try to do it more than once. There is a thing called forward engineer, and it will take the diagram that you have and it will write it as a database. If you have an existing database and you want to create a model from it, you can reverse engineer. So those are nicer. It's a nicer environment in some ways. So I'm going to forward engineer this, but I'm going to tell you not to do this unless you're done, because it doesn't just replace what you did in the past, and then you do it, do your model and then pass it over. It doesn't replace it, it just sort of blends it, and it makes a mess. So I'm going to, I think I can just do next. If you want stored local connection, it would be local instance, but I don't think you need that. I'm going to, for the most part, ignore all of these. These are things that you can leave out. If you have data, you might want to do generate index or insert statements. Needs my password. So it's going to export the table objects. We don't have most of those other objects, so that's fine. It gives you the SQL. And this is actually, notice it has copy to clipboard. So if you want the SQL for what it's about to do, you could just copy to clipboard and have it. I'll do that real quickly. And then I'm going to do next, and it did it. So when I go back now, this is the model. We're in the model. If I hit the little house here, it goes back to the main one or local instance here. So I have Sequila, which is the example. I think I need to refresh here. And there's Python Club, which I will probably delete. But it has the two tables, member and test. I don't know if I can make that bigger or higher. It's a little higher. So it actually created the database at that point. And if I open those, it'll have the columns.
That seems easier than the other one.
In some ways it is. This environment is a little bit nicer. It has a few bugs occasionally. Partially that's just a side effect of it being open source and free, probably. But it's a pretty nice environment. It actually is easier to work with. SQL Server is a lot more sophisticated and complex in some ways, but this is really a nice environment.
I really like the tabs.
Yeah.
Our nightmare, 1998, 18 different columns.
So, and there are things you can do. I'm zoomed, so it's hard to get. It's just a local instance. You can collapse most of the management stuff, which makes it a little bit better. And this is the SQL window, as I said, and you know, it's a pretty nice environment overall. So, last thing, and then I will give you time to work if you want, particularly if you need to finish up the last stuff. So I'm going back up here. I'm going to go to Canvas, and we've done SQL Server, right? So we've finished up SQL Server, or you're working on finishing it. This one is MySQL, and it's the Python Club. We're going to go through the same process, but it's a little bit easier because we don't have to create a model and then recreate the model. We just create the model and then just click forward engineer, and it's there. I'm going to ask you to do a draft and have me kind of inspect the draft before you commit it. Just because, as I said, it's a bit of a mess when you commit, and it's not very good. So we've got the revised and the create, and we'll do the sample data and tests again. Okay, so the Python Club, I'm just going to do the PDF. It's basically a school club. One of the reasons I did this kind of thing for this database is that MySQL is typically used as a back-end to web pages. Right? That's what MySQL is used for more than anything else. It's basically a content management database for web pages. So we're assuming that there's going to be a club where people are studying Python and want to talk about Python. Probably if you take Python, you may not want to, but whatever. And they're going to build a website, but we're going to, again, only focus on the back end. It needs to track all the meetings, times, and places, so it's sort of a schedule that way. Summaries of meetings that have already happened. It should list all the speakers and presentations presented by the club, as well as upcoming meetups and events. And it's also to track resources. And by resources and tutorials. So like if people find a book that they like or a website that they like, or a video on YouTube, they can list it and people can react to that. So that's that. All the resources and tutorials should be posted by members. And a list of general announcements. And there are different ways to build this. We can talk about it. The business rules are kind of important. Again, you can ignore the tasks. You're not obligated to do these tasks. A couple of things about the business rules. So only members can post announcements. Only club officers can post meetings. You do not put this stuff into the tables. You need to have a list of members. That's part of what it says. And you need to know which members are officers. But you don't put the permissions in tables. The permissions are done externally. There are users and roles and permissions that are added external to the tables. The tables, what you do is the external roles give you permissions on tables. Does that make sense? So basically what I'm saying is don't try to manage all don't try to manage the permissions.
Are they queries?
No, they're actually,
I guess I missed the point of why you.
well, I think it's partially just that you need to know that there are members and you need to know that some of them have to be identified as officers.
So everyone in this is going to be a member, and then only some of them will be.
Only some of them will be
You have a
officers.
table for each one.
You could, or you could have a field in the members that says position, which could be just member, or it could be president or secretary or something like that. I mean, there are different ways to do it. When you go
Is
to,
one way or the other of that more efficient?
it depends. It depends on if you want to keep a good history.
I guess if the officers would have to have something else interesting that you'd want to have a table for.
What you might want to set a separate table is just for history. So if you have a long line of presidents, if you put just a kind of a flag field in the member, you would know who's currently president, but you might not know who was president 2 years ago. Does that make sense? So you could have like an officer that just has a member number, office, and date. Date started, date ended, or something.
For that, we don't have to get that sophisticated with it, right?
We don't, but we'll see. It's sort of just this, like before. We'll build this up. I'm gonna slip this open. Let's see. Client users and privileges. We may do this later when we talk about security, but this is where you would set permissions, users and privileges.
Okay.
All right. I think that's all I'm going to show you today. If you are done with everything in the Vincent's final, you are welcome to try to start working on the Python Club database. If you're still working on the other, that's fine. Couple of other announcements. I think most of you know there's no class on Wednesday. It's an instructional or non-instructional day for instructors. We have to be here. You don't have to. This lab will be open if you want it. Eleni will be in the office. She can open the door if it's closed. Yeah.
So first, when is Python Club going to be due? And then second, is there more information you're going to show us before we
Well, we'll talk about it some too, probably.
Is that next Monday?
Yeah, next Monday. I'm not going to make it due until we're ready.
Okay.
So it's probably like everything else will be like a week behind.
Okay. So like next Monday, we might have more information.
Yeah. So next Monday, I just wanted to give you some time to work on the other stuff if you need. Next Monday, we will talk more about Python Club and maybe brainstorm it a little bit together and then get you started working on it.
Okay. really quick to get your response.
Yeah, if you're in a group, you could, you know, you can.
Like, you might start going down a bad path.
Well, if you go down a bad path, you can always fix
I
it.
guess that's true.
We learned a lot last time.
We definitely did. We had to fix our own mess. And I think we, you know, still left it. There's some issues.
Oh, you know what? He actually, I did get that file.
Well, I mean, Workbench.
He gave me credit. So,
Model.
Yeah.
so he's,
Bio, heavy,
whatever
model.
he turned in,
Mm,
he went on mine and said, hey.
yeah, I mean, mine, like you saw it, we typed our whole
We
writing.
did the same thing.
I left a comment telling them it's both of us.
You know, I need to do that.
It's pretty easy.
Are you guys mostly done with Vincent's?
We have, I don't know what everybody else is saying.
I had the impression, although I haven't looked carefully, that most people were still working on it a bit.
I'll probably just look at the Python stuff and see.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, you could play with the environment a little bit to get more familiar.
Right,
It has its quirkiness, but if you really wanted to leave, you could do that.
I might have a little bit.
I know the other class, most of the people were still working on Vincent's, and so this class tends to be a little ahead.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, we're the smart ones.
Hey. Oh, I would phrase it that
We're the
way.
overachievers.
Yeah, there
I actually put the LAR, but I didn't get the thing.
I'm gonna stop the video.
I could have 2 hours.
I think I played maybe.
When, oh, I know why I won't.
Maybe like, well, I started writing that better than on TV.
So, if you're watching this video,
Where they do that.
just know that there's a place in it where everything goes black for a while. I think that when I'm troubleshooting and I